tonight we're going to start off with probably one of the most amazing things that Jesus did that called him a legend, and that was the raising of Lazarus from the dead. So if you have your Bibles or your Bible app, you want to turn over to John chapter 11. I've titled this message, basically, it's the big idea, which is the impossible is possible through Christ. Things that we think are impossible are possible through Christ. And we're going to look at this, and we're going to see how others that surrounded themselves with Jesus really didn't think raising a person from the dead who had been in the grave for 4 days was possible. They've seen him do other things, but they've never seen him do this before. And so starting in verse 1, it says, "Now a man named Lazarus was sick. He was from Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. This Mary, whose brother Lazarus now lay sick." So this is two sisters and a brother. They're all related. And the same one who poured the perfume on the Lord and wiped his feet with her hair. So the sister sent word to Jesus, "Lord, the one you love is sick." I got to stop here. This statement here has been probably misused in our day and age, because now when we have this issue of homosexuality that's going on and is so prevalent, and they're trying to find biblical passages that seem to imply homosexuality, they'll use this and say, see, Jesus loved this man, and so probably loved him in more of an intimate way. Well, that's not what it is saying here. Basically, how they should interpret it nowadays to keep up with the time is, it should say, Jesus, you know the one you love like a brother? He's sick. That's what he's talking about. That's what they're sharing. That this is a person that was very dear to Jesus, like a brother was, and he cared for him deeply. And so they knew that because he cherished that relationship with Lazarus, he would want to know that his dear, 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 dear friend is sick. That's what you need to get out of this. And so when he heard this, Jesus said, "This sickness will not end in death. No, it is for God's glory, so that God's Son may be glorified through it." Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus, yet when he heard that Lazarus was sick, he stayed where he was two more days. So the disciples are hearing this, they're seeing this and going, what is this all about? This is a person that you love. I don't know about you, but I've been in situations before when there's a person sick that you love and care for deeply, you want to go be by their side. When my dad was alive, he had cardiomyopathy, and we didn't know when he would die because his heart could give out at any time. I got a phone call from the hospital saying, your dad is here, his potassium level is off the hook, that he could go at any time. You better get down here. I immediately got on the phone. I called my brother who is in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, and I said, Brad, Dad might be dying. You better get here now. Within an hour, he was on a plane from Jackson Hole down here to see his dad because he thought this might be the last time I get to talk to my dad. That's the kind of love we have going on here. Yet, when he hears it, he doesn't do anything about it. He says, well, this won't end in death. He'll be okay. And then they go on, and disciples are like, oh, okay, not a big deal. So we go on. So, going on, verse 7. Then he said to his disciples, let us go back to Judea. So this is 2 days later, he says this. Then he said, but Rabbi, they said, a short while ago the Jews tried to stone you, and yet you are going back there. Jesus said, are there not 12 hours of daylight? A man who walks by day will not stumble, for he sees by this world's light. It is when he walks by night that he stumbles, for he has no light. After he had said this, he went on to tell them, our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I'm going there to wake him up. His disciples replied, Lord, if he sleeps, he will get better. Jesus had been speaking of his death, but his disciples thought he meant natural sleep. So then he told them plainly, Lazarus is dead, and for your sake I am glad I was not there, so that you may believe, but let us go to him. Then Thomas, who is called Didymus, said to the rest of the disciples, let us go that we may die with him. So still, the disciples are more concerned about themselves, more concerned about Jesus being killed than they are ever about Lazarus. And he's trying to explain to him, I'm going there because I'm glad that Lazarus is dead, because I'm going there and I'm going to show you how much power I have. And they're more concerned about, well, we're going to get killed. That's what's going to happen here. And, well, I guess, we'll stay with our brother Jesus and we'll go back, and knowing that we're going to die with him. So let's go. I'm sure it was a really encouraging talk that Didymus gave to the rest of the disciples. So then going on, verse 17, on his arrival, Jesus found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. Bethany was less than 2 miles from Jerusalem, and many Jews had come to Martha and Mary to comfort them in the loss of their brothers. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went out to meet him, but Mary stayed at home. Lord, Martha said to Jesus, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But I know that even now God will give you whatever you ask. Jesus said to her, brother, your brother will rise again. Martha answered, I know he will rise again in the resurrection at the last day. Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me will live even though he dies, and whoever lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this? She said, yes, Lord. She told him, I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, who has come into the world. And after she had said this, she went back and called her sister Mary aside. The teacher is here, she said, and is asking for you. When Mary heard this, she got up quickly and went to him. Now, Jesus had not yet entered the village, but was still at the place where Martha had met him. When the Jews who had been with Mary in the house comforting her noticed how quickly she got up and went out, they followed her, supposing she was going to go to the tomb to mourn there. When Mary reached the place where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet and said, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews had come along with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and trouble. Where have you laid him? He asked. Come and see, Lord, they replied. Shortest verse in the Bible. Jesus wept. Then Jesus said, see how he loved him? Then the Jews said, see how he loved him? But some of them said, could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying? So now, again, they're questioning his power, what kind of power he has, because they're basically saying there's no way he could do anything about it now. He's been dead for 4 days. Verse 38, Jesus, once more deeply moved, came to the tomb. It was a cave with a stone laid across the entrance. Take away the stone, he said. But Lord, said Martha, the sister of the dead man, by this time there is a bad odor, for he has been there 4 days. You got to understand, the body decomposes, and in 4 days, basically you have the guts inside that are dissolving, that create these gases in them, and those gases have to expel someplace in the body. They wrap the body to keep it from bloating, but still those gases have to come out, and it smells. And they're saying, look, there's already a bad odor. Then Jesus said, did I not tell you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God? So they took away the stone. Then Jesus looked up and said, Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I said this for the benefit of the people standing here, that they may believe that you sent me. When he had said this, Jesus called in a loud voice, Lazarus, come out of here. The dead man came out, his hands and feet wrapped with strips of linen and the cloth around his face. Jesus said to them, take off the grave clothes and let him go. Here you have an amazing, amazing story of the power of Jesus, that when everybody around him was questioning what he was going to be able to do, he knew what he was able to do, but none of them believed that he could take a person that was actually rotting in a tomb and bring a rotting corpse back to life. They felt like his time was limited, his power was limited, his power was limited, that there's no way he could do something of that magnitude. So here's my point in this. If Christ is in control of our trials, then he will be glorified through it. If you go back to verse 4 at the beginning of this story, you'll see when he heard this, Jesus said, "This sickness will not end in death. No, it is for God's glory, so that God's Son may be glorified through this." Lazarus dying was for God's glory. Lazarus dying was for God's glory. Now, here's the thing. I am so glad I was not Lazarus, because honestly, I think it sucks to be Lazarus, because now, after being dead for 4 days, he comes back to life. He's got to die again. Somewhere he had to die again. It's like, dude, seriously? I have to experience death. I mean, none of us want to experience death in here, but we know that someday we are. But for Lazarus, he experienced it once. He's like, I don't want to go through that again. Dang it, you brought me back to life, Jesus. I got to go through this again. But he did it because it was what God had ordained for his glory. And we need to understand this, men, that when we go through trials, when we go through suffering, when we have struggles in life, whether it is through relationships, whether it's through a job, whatever it might be, you got to understand that God will be glorified through it if you allow yourself to lean into him and allow him to instruct your life and allow him to guide your life. But let me make this clear, though. There's a difference between trial and consequence in a man's life. And a lot of times there's men out there that think what they're going through is a trial when it's actually a consequence. If you come to me and you sit there and say, hey, pray for me. I think I'm going through a trial. My wife is saying she wants a divorce. And I go, well, talk to me about that. Well, I did have this affair one time on her. And yeah, I've been looking at some porn. But you know what? That's over with now. And I'm done with it. And I just need to really heal our marriage. I'm going to sit there and go, that's not a trial. This is called a consequence. You've made some horrible decisions that you've wrecked your marriage, and somehow now you want God to miraculously fix your marriage? And this could have been over 15, 20 years in your marriage, and all of a sudden you're like, oh my goodness, I'm going through a trial because my wife wants to divorce me, and I'm going, it's because of your poor decisions. Don't blame this on God. That's a consequence. If you come to me and say, you know what, pray for me because financially I'm going to be tight because I just lost my job. Well, what happened? Well, I got fired. Well, why did you get fired? Well, I was lying to my boss and I was showing up late a lot, but I'm really struggling here. I'm going to go, that's not a trial. Again, that's a consequence. You show up on time. You shouldn't be lying to your boss. But if you come to me and say, hey, Brent, pray for me, our company's downsizing. And in downsizing, they're laying me off. And I'm really scared right now because I don't know how I'm going to pay my bills. Okay, you're going through a trial. Or Brent, I just found out, diagnosed with cancer. They're saying it's stage 4. Okay, you're going through a trial right now. You've heard me talk about Kevin Riccaboni. Kevin Riccaboni's been in this ministry for about 6 years, I think. He came to me about 4 years ago, said, hey, pray for me. I'm going into surgery. I have this brain tumor. They think it's malignant, but it might be cancerous. But he had such a positive attitude. He's like, but God's got this. He goes into surgery. Unfortunately, he stroked during surgery. And when he woke up, his face was swollen. I went over to see him, and he just didn't look the same. He was paralyzed basically on one side. He could barely talk because of it, and he had to go through a lot of rehabilitation. Well, then I get a phone call. We're actually in Alaska this summer. I get a phone call from him. He's like, hey, Pastor, I want to share with you that there's tumors again in my brain, and they have to have surgery again. And I said, Kevin, I don't know what God is doing here, but for some reason he's found you worthy to go through this. And I don't know how he's going to use you, but we're going to pray that you're going to be used through this. So he had the surgery, everything went well. He calls me not too long ago, says, I got a story for you. I got done with my surgery, and they rolled me into one of the rooms, but it was not a room that was just with me in it. There was another gentleman in there. Matter of fact, this gentleman, he was going to be going in for surgery, and he has the same exact cancer I do in the brain. And so we got to talking, and in the process, I just asked him, "Do you know Jesus?" And he said, "No, I don't." And over discussions, Kevin said, "I was able to lead this man to the Lord." And Kevin just started crying on the phone. I said, "Kevin, you know, that might be one of the ways that God's going to use you to bring glory to him." And that's what we see with the raising of Lazarus, that this is used for God's glory. Next thing that I've noticed here is the trials of life become easier with Christ by our side. See, look at verses 9 and 10. It says, Jesus answered, are there not 12 hours of daylight? A man who walks by day will not stumble, for he sees by this world's light. It is when he walks by night that he stumbles, for he has no light. What he's saying here is, when you have Christ in your life, you have that light, and no matter what goes on, you're able to see and you're able to navigate through life a lot easier, and you're not going to be stumbling. But if you don't have Christ in your life, and there's many people in this world that will go through trials. There's people that will have cancer, and it was nothing to do with them, but they might not have Christ in their life. They're going to struggle because they're trying to find purpose. But when we are Christ followers, when we struggle, we know that there's purpose, and we know that we have Christ in our life, which gives us that light so we can see the path more clearly. And we understand that this is not all there is to the life, that this is temporary, what we live in, that eternity waits for us. It's like these guys going on a hike. If Steve said, "Hey, we're going on a hike, we're going up South Mountain, and we're going to do it in the middle of the night without flashlights. Who's in?" You're going to go, "Not me. You know, I don't want to tear myself up." You want to go, "Oh, no, we're going to do it in the morning when it's light. It's easy to see the path. It's easy to see where the rocks are, where to step," right? And that's what he's talking about here. And so when you go through struggles in your life, having Christ by your side makes it so much easier. Having that relationship with him makes it so much easier. Having that devotional time makes it so much easier. Having that prayer time every day makes it so much easier. Because now you're walking step by step with Christ. Next, our faith is limited by what or who we believe in. Look at verse 14. Verse 14 says, "So then he told them plainly, Lazarus is dead, and for your sake I am glad I was not there." Why was he glad? He wasn't glad that Lazarus was dead. He was glad that Lazarus was dead for the sake of his disciples, because still they didn't clearly believe who he was. Up until this moment, they're probably just saying, "Yeah, he's a good person. He's a prophet. He's the Son of God." But of course, he's not God. And so he's saying, "Look, I'm glad that Lazarus is dead, because I'm going to show you the power that I have by going back there." And so by this time, him going back there, he says, this is where you're going to believe in me, and you're going to believe in my power. A lot of times, men, we'll go through life and we'll say we believe in Christ, but we tend to put our faith in a box with everything else. We have our faith at church, but then when we're at work, it's different. When we're at home, it's different. Well, you're limiting God's faith. You're limiting God's power in your life, because all you're saying is, this is where I see God can work. But over here, my job, not so much. I got to keep control over that. Over here, my family, my relationship, I got to have control over that too. And he's saying, no, no, no. If you trust and believe in me, and you have faith in me, then every decision you make should be based upon what I tell you to do, should be based upon what you believe I should be doing in your life. That's what he's saying. And when you have that in your life, now it becomes easier to make those decisions, because you're not making them for yourself. You're making them for your Lord. because you know he is the one that's in control. And I trust and believe no matter what circumstances come my way, whether I lose a job, I lose a family member, if I get cancer, whatever the case may be, I know he's there. I know he has the power to cure me. I know he has the power to give me a better job than the one I have. I know he has the power to do all these things. And if I trust in him and if I give him every aspect of my life, he will take control over it. He will be able to take the impossible and make it possible. Lastly, through Christ, all things are possible. And you see that by he takes a dead man that was rotting. And this was in the summertime or in the springtime. So it was warm, they said, about this time. It wasn't in the coolness. So that body was cooking a little bit. And so he wanted to make sure everybody knew this guy is dead, dead, dead. Okay? We all know, and if you've been around any kind of rotting corpse and you smell it, you know something's dead around here, right? And here's Martha saying, that's going to stink, Lord. We're going to open up that tomb and it's going to stink. And in the back of his mind, I'm sure he's like, yeah, I hope it does, because I want you to understand the power I have. Because if I can take a stinking, rotting corpse and bring it back to life, what do you think I could do in your life, right? So in closing, I have down here, Jesus can make a fictitious animal like a unicorn come to life. You know that? He could just say unicorn, and all of a sudden we have unicorns, right? Unicorns is something that we'll use when it's one of those, yeah, really, this is impossible. It's like finding a unicorn. Well, my niece and her husband came into one of those impossible situations. See, they have two boys, and they wanted a girl, but instead of trying for a girl, they decided that they were going to go through the foster adopt system. And so they were searching, and they finally found this organization, and they were walking through the process, and there's this checklist, and I've adopted two kids, so I clearly understand this checklist. They say, okay, what do you want? You know, it's like a laundry list. Well, we want a girl, okay? We want a girl under 2 years of age, okay? And we want a girl that's the same race as us. And they looked at them and they said, well, good luck with that, because a lot of the foster adopt children that we've been getting have been, a lot of times they're Hispanic or interracial, and we rarely come across like a Anglo-Saxon white little girl. And they said, you know, good luck with that, maybe 2-3 years. And, you know, I think John, you know, was like, well, if it's like finding a unicorn, then it's like finding a unicorn. And if we're not supposed to adopt, we're not supposed to adopt. You know, so he just put it in that category. But this is how God works the impossible and makes it possible. So now when you hear the rest of the story, Janelle goes through this process, and she is talking to the caseworker and says, why don't you talk to this other individual that's gone through the same process and they already have their child? So she calls her up. Hey, how's it going? How is things doing? Great, you know, and we're taking her to church, blah, blah, blah. And she's like, oh, what church do you go to? She says, I go to Cornerstone. And she says, well, that's interesting because my uncle is one of the pastors at Cornerstone. And so next thing I know, I get this text from her. And actually it was on a Thursday evening, and it says, hey, do you know this individual? I was like, you all know, you know, we're a church of 3,000-4,000. And I'm like, no, I don't. I said, well, you know, if you get a chance, you want to meet her. I said, well, what's this about? She said, well, we're getting certified to foster adopt. Now, understand, I don't have daily conversations with Janelle. I don't even have weekly conversations. Matter of fact, she's so busy with my brother with their art galleries, the only time I actually see them is when I go to the art auction. That's a whole other story, and I'll see Janelle, how are you doing? Or I'll see him at Christmas time, or I'll see him at Thanksgiving. Okay, that's the kind of relatives, you know, I know I'm a bad uncle, I guess. But anyways, but she texts me this. Here's what she doesn't know. See, I own with my brother a fitness club in Bullhead City. And we have a godly man named Gary that operates it. And he just got done telling me days before, hey, pray for me, Brent. I'm going through a struggle right now because my son, who is a meth addict, has been put in prison, and I don't know how long he's going to be there. And then his wife is also a meth addict. She was pregnant. She went into the hospital. She gave birth, but because she knew she had warrants out for her arrest, she abandoned the child and left. And now I have their 3 children, my 3 granddaughters, and now they're asking if I want to have this baby in my house. And I said, no, I can't. And so that baby is in a foster care system. So pray for me as I have these 3 girls in my home right now. And Janelle texts me days later. I call her on the phone and I said, Janelle, I said, I don't know where this goes, but here's the situation. There is a baby up in Bullhead City right now that just got abandoned by her mom. It's a little girl. It's in a foster care home. And in the foster care home, they're not going to adopt this child, and so they're looking for a home. So Janelle goes ahead and decides to I didn't know he was, decides to look into it, and she finds, and he's getting ahead of the story here, but that's okay. He decides to go ahead, she decides to go ahead and look into it and realizes that's the same agency. And so with the same agencies, they were able to go up there and they were able to see this girl. And they realized that they were able to have them foster the child while they sever the rights of the parents. And there was a long process. But about 3-4 weeks ago, they were able to actually adopt this child. And last Sunday, we all got together and we had a celebration, as you can see on the picture. But here's what was interesting that Janelle told me. She said, when we went to pick her up, they had some toys with them. One of the toys that they had was a stuffed unicorn. And they said, that's really cool. And so at this party, as you can see, she's wearing a unicorn dress. This is Shay. She's wearing a unicorn dress. And we had a big, celebration of her adoption, that she is now in the grade 8. That's my brother there, and that's my son behind him, and that's my sister-in-law, and that's John and Janelle right there. And so when I prayed, I did tell them, I said, someday Shay's going to hear about the amazing work of God and how he had ordained this, and he made something that was impossible, like unicorns, become possible. And that's the kind of faith that we have to have, no matter what circumstances are going your way, to say, you know what? I serve a God that makes impossible things become possible. Okay? So let me pray for you, and then you have some discussions around your table. God, I pray for these men in this room that you would just give them a good time in discussion. And thank you that you're a God that can make the impossible possible, that you're able to take dead things and bring them back to life. And now bless this time as these men have discussions around their tables. In your son's name, amen. Amen.